My daughter wanted a stitch cake for her birthday, so today I'm going to show you how to make this beautiful stitch cake using Betty Crocker cake mix and frosting. So let's get started. You will need 2 rectangular cake layers that have cooled completely. I used the Betty Crocker Super Moist French Vanilla Cake Mix, 1 box for each layer. I used a 9x13 cake pan and I made each layer separately. Next, we're going to check if our cake layer is level. And this one is not, so I just need to level it off. So I'm going to put a cutting board on top of the cake. I'm going to hold the cutting board and the cooling rack and just flip my cake around. Then I'm going to put a non-slip grip underneath my cutting board to make sure it does not move. Using a Wilton cake leveler, I'm going to put it to notch 4 for my cake. Now, you need to figure out which notch you need based on the cake. So you would line it up to the cake and see which notch will make your cake level. Make sure the left and the right side of this cake leveler are the same notch, or else you're going to have a slanted cake. Then we're just going to move it back and forth. And while we're doing this, I just like to put my hand on the cake to keep it down. I'm going to go right to the end, and then that has cut the top of the cake layer. Then I'm just going to slide that wire under and just remove that top layer. Next, we're going to do the second layer the exact same way. Now, if you find that you didn't get it exactly level the first time, you can take another run at it, or you can use a sharp knife and just make sure when you're cutting that it is level to the table. Now we're ready to assemble the cake. So I'm just going to use my cake board and I'm going to place it on the cake, flip it around, and I find this the easiest way to transfer the cake layers. Next, I'm just going to center it and remove any crumbs that may have happened during the transfer. Now I'm going to add a filling, and today I'm using the St. Alpheur Red Raspberry Fruit Spread. And I love it because it's not super sweet. So I'm just going to apply a thin layer, and I just want to make sure not to go right to the edge. So stay a bit back from it, and I'm just going to do the whole cake. Then I'm going to add my second cake layer, and you will notice it is upside down. So what is on top of this cake is what would have been on the bottom of the cake pan. I'm just going to push it down and make sure that it's attached. Remove all the crumbs, and then we're ready for our frosting. Today I'm using the Betty Crocker Creamy Deluxe French Vanilla Frosting, and I use 3 cans. We're going to start by emptying 1 can of frosting into a mixing bowl, and using an electric mixer on the highest speed, I'm just going to whip this frosting because I find it easier to spread. We'll just do that for a couple minutes, and then we're ready to apply it to the cake. Now, using an angle spatula, I'm just going to get my frosting that I just whipped, and I'm going to put it on the top of my cake in dollops. Then I'm going to spread that frosting in a sweeping motion, so go in one motion. I always want to make sure that I have frosting between the spatula and the cake at all times so that it does not pull the cake up. Next, we're going to go to the side of the cake and we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to apply a thin layer of frosting, and it's okay if you see some of the cake through this because this is just the crumb coat. And the reason we do a crumb coat is to lock in the crumbs so that our final layer does not have any crumbs visible nor any cake. Now we're going to scrape off the excess frosting. We'll start by the side. We're going to go down, gently scrape the side of the cake and go around removing that frosting. Now you do not want to put that back into your bowl of frosting because this frosting will have crumbs in it. Next, I'm going to pull in the top sides. And finally, I'm going to gently scrape the top of the cake to remove any excess frosting. This does not look pretty, I know, but it is just the crumb coat. Next, I'm going to clean up the edges of my cake board. So using a knife with a paper towel, I'm just going to go around the outer edge of the cake and remove all the frosting from the cake board. Next, we are going to put the cake in the freezer for approximately 30 minutes until the crumb coat is dry to the touch. Then remove it and we're ready for our top layer of frosting. Now I'm going to do my final coat of frosting, and I'm using whipped frosting for this. So like before, I've whipped up 1 can of frosting in a mixing bowl. I'm going to apply a dollop of frosting to the cake, and I'm just going to spread it across. Now remember, in one motion, I'm not going back and forth, and I always want to make sure that there is frosting between that crumb coat and my spatula. Next, I'm going to do the side of the cake, doing the same thing. I'm going to apply dollops of frosting, and I'm just going to spread it along the side of the cake. Then I'm going to clean my spatula and I'm going to gently glide the spatula to remove any excess frosting from the side of the cake. If there's a part where you've taken too much off, you can simply add a little bit of frosting back on and re-scrape. Then I'm going to pull in the top sides of the cake just to flatten it out. Next, using a 13-inch angled spatula that I have warmed in hot water, I'm going to smooth the top of the cake. Now, so what I've done is I've run the spatula in hot water and then I've dried it off. And now when you see that I run it across the cake, I'm gently gliding. I'm not pushing down hard. It's a gentle glide in one motion and it smooths the top of the cake. And you want to rewarm it often. So it's not like I've only done it once to do this whole cake. I have rewarmed the spatula many times. Now, if you find a spot that has a divot or it's not exactly level, just add a bit more frosting and then smooth out. You're going to keep doing this until you're happy with the finished look. Now we're going to make an outline of stitch on the cake. So using a toothpick, I'm going to gently etch my frosting. And I'm going to start with his head. So I'm going to do a circle, then I'm going to flatten it out at the bottom. And then I'm going to connect it around. And what I've done here is I've tried to center this in the cake so that stitch will be in the center of the cake when we're done. Next, I'm going to do the hair at the top of his head. So we have two that are spiking out to the left, and then one that is spiking out to the right. And it doesn't have to be exact here. You'll see that this will all work out. Next, I'm going to start with his ears and I'm going to come from the top and I'm going to join it down to the middle part of his head. Then I'm going to go on the outside. We make that notch in and then bring the ear around. Then I'm going to bring a line straight down. Then one more line that comes from the outer ear and connects into that center line. We're going to do the right ear. We're going to draw up, around. Now this notch in his ear is on the bottom. So we're going to make the notch and then we're going to come around, bottom, middle. Then we have to do our lines inside. So one on the right and then one on the left that connects to the previous line. Next, I'm going to do his outer eye. And it's just kind of like a circle. I'm going to do it on both sides of his face. Next, his nose. So we're going to start with a curved line and then bring it down almost like a curved triangle. And then I'm just going to fix his outer eye because those eyes should be touching his nose. You can always change things if you make a mistake. Then I'm going to add the mouth. I'm going to do his inner eye, and it's more of a, instead of a circle, it's kind of like a triangular circle. Next, I touch the cake, so I'm just going to flatten that off. And this is when you make a mistake, you can see how easy you can just correct it. I'm going to bring the bottom of his head down a bit lower because it was too high. I'm going to draw an arch on the bottom left of his head. And then I'm going to continue that down just to make an elongated oval. And these are his hands. We need one on the left, and then I'm going to do the same thing with a bit of space on the right. So I don't want those inside of the ovals to connect. Next, I'm going to make his feet. So I'm just going to make a circle coming out of his hands. And again, on the other side. We're going to add the lines for his outer body. Then 2 lines at the bottom of the body. Next, circles inside the feet. And I'm just going to make his hands a bit longer. Now we have our outline of stitch on our cake. I know it doesn't look amazing, but it will all come together in the end. Now we are going to prepare our frosting for piping. And for improved piping results, I created a frosting hack. Using the last can of frosting, we are going to empty it into a mixing bowl and sift in 3/4 cup of icing sugar, also known as powdered sugar. Next, I'm going to add a pinch of salt just to cut the sweetness. And finally, using an electric mixer, we're going to turn it on the lowest speed and gently mix just so the powder doesn't fly up at us. Then we're going to turn the mixer onto the highest speed and mix until fully combined. Now our frosting is ready to be colored. So the first thing we need to do is divide our frosting into 5 bowls. We will need 1 small bowl of purple, and to make that we use Wilton Icing color violet. You will need 1 small bowl of black, and I use black Wilton Icing color. You will need 1 small bowl of dark blue, and to make that I use Wilton Icing color royal blue and a touch of black. You will need a medium-sized bowl of a light blue, and to make that I use Wilton Icing color sky blue, royal blue, and a touch of violet. And lastly, you will need 1 medium-sized bowl of blue, and to make that I use Wilton Icing color royal blue. Lastly, you will need a dab of white frosting for the pupils and the eyes, and I just used my leftover frosting from my top coat. Keep in mind that when coloring your frosting, the shade darkens a little bit over time. So after 20 or 30 minutes, the shade will actually be a bit darker than when you first mixed it. Next, you want to chill your frosting in the refrigerator for at least 20 minutes prior to piping to get crisp piping designs. Now, let's pipe our cake. You will need a 12-inch piping bag filled with black chilled icing and fitted with a Wilton piping tip number 2. And we are going to use this to outline Stitch. I'm going to start with his head. If you need help with your piping technique, click on the link in the right-hand corner. For the products and tools that I use in this video, check out the description box below. Next, we're going to move to his ears. And remember the notches in the ears. And we're just going to outline each spot where we've already etched in with our toothpick. All of the lines we made, we are just going to outline them in black. Then I'm going to do the inside of his face. So first his eyes, then his nose, nostrils, and his mouth. Finally, I'm going to fill inside of his eyes, and we're going to fill that right in with black. So we're always going to start with the outline and then fill it in. Now I'm going to move to his arms, his feet, remember, take your time when you're doing this. And if you make a mistake, like just there, I'm going to stop, I'm going to get a toothpick, remove the frosting, and then repipe. And I'm just going to finish off the outside of his body and then the bottom of his body. Lastly, I'm going to add the marks above his nose. Next, we're going to fill in the outline. So first, I'm going to start with the light blue around his eyes. Whenever we're piping, we always go from the outside to the inside. So first, I'm going to pipe around his eyes. And the tip that I'm using is the Wilton piping tip number 16, which makes star shapes. Then there's also the light blue that comes down from the mouth. And so I'm just going to do a line down the side of each end of the mouth. Then now I have my shape, and I'm going to go from the outside to the inside. So now I'm going to go right above the mouth. And then next I'm going to fill in that shape. Then I'm going to move to the center of his body. Again, outside first, then fill it in. Next, we're going to do the regular blue for the rest of the body. And again, I'm using Wilton piping tip number 16. So I'm going to fill in the outside of the ears. Then I'm going to move to the head, and I would like to do the bits of hair at the top first. Then again, Complete your full shape on the outside, and then move to the inside. Now when I did this part, you'll see that those notches above his nose kind of get covered up, and I actually like it better without, so I'm just going to leave it like that. Next, I'm going to do the bottom part of his face. And then move to his arms. Now, one thing to keep in mind, when I'm not using the frosting, I keep it in the fridge to keep it chilled. We're going to finish off the rest of his body and his feet. Next, I'm going to do the purple, and again, it is Wilton piping tip number 16. We're just going to fill in the ears. And lastly, we are going to do the dark blue for his nose, and again, it's Wilton piping tip number 16. And one thing I'm seeing is that his mouth is not very visible, so I'm just going to go over it again with my black frosting with the piping tip number 2. And I think that looks much better. Now we're going to add just a dab of white frosting to get that pupil. Now you could use a Wilton piping tip number 2, but just for this one little dot on each eye, I'm just using a toothpick for this one. Now for this cake, my daughter is turning 11, so she wants me to actually make the number 11 in here as well, so I'm just going to etch that out into the frosting with my toothpick. You could do whatever number you want, you could leave the number off altogether, it's whatever you would like. Then I'm just going to outline it again in my black, so always with an image, we're just going to outline it in black, and then we can fill it in. And for the 11, I'm going to use the main blue and stitch. You could use whatever color you want. You could make this cake a little bit different, or you can do it exactly like I've done it. Next, I want to add some tropical flowers to the cake. So using the violet, I'm using a Wilton piping tip number 190 to make these flowers. And I'm going to put them around the cake just to fill up space. Lastly, I'm going to be using Wilton piping tip number 129 with light blue icing for the edges of the cake. I'm going to go around the top edge. Then I see a bit of frosting around my cake board, so I'm just going to quickly clean that up, and I do that with a paper towel and a knife. It just gives it a nice finished look at the end. I'm just going to use a damp cloth and make sure that there is no frosting. Then I'm just going to finish it off with the bottom edge of the cake with the same design as I used for the top edge. Now, one thing I'm seeing is that at the front edge, there's a couple of the designs that I didn't like, so I just use a toothpick, remove it, and repipe. And now our beautiful stitch cake is done. I hope you enjoyed this video and that your stitch cake is absolutely priceless. Happy baking!